The tariff slowdown has begun. Bookings of container shipments from China to the U.S. are down nearly 50%.
And Chinese goods are pushing product prices higher and forcing many U.S. importers to halt shipment.
Imagine a huge port on the shores of a vast ocean, normally filled with the sounds of cranes and the rumble of trucks that never stop due to container traffic. Now the docks are silent, the cranes idle, the workers on half-empty shifts, the warehouse doors locked. The 145% tariff on imported goods from China,
the goods, because 145% tariff. But at a certain point, I hope we're going to make a deal with China. We're talking to China.
Has turned Los Angeles, one of the largest ports in the United States, into a ghost town. Cargo flow was blocked, many shipments were cancelled, and $14 billion worth of goods remained in limbo. Consumers are noticing fewer choices on grocery store shelves. Some products are missing, but perhaps they don't realize how deep the problem is. Who is paying the real price? And what kind of predicament is the entire ecosystem, from retail to logistics, being dragged into? From silent ports to lost cargo, from gaps in US shelves to global trade balances, let's examine this huge dilemma together. Normally, ports are lively places where importers and exporters are busy shipping. Cranes are busy unloading and loading containers, ship traffic is intense, but suddenly there is a huge port area, but half of it is empty and the other half is full of unattended containers. Inside those containers are US-branded textiles, electronics, furniture, automotive spare parts. Some of them are waiting in warehouses because the buyer has given up on the tariff price, while others have caused the seller to withdraw because of customs barriers, saying, "Let's not bother." The result is a lot of goods that have neither been shipped nor officially cancelled. The Port of Los Angeles is known in the US economy as one of the main gateways for Chinese imports. It is a bee in the bonnet, handling tens of millions of containers every year. Now, with cranes idle, customs officers on half-empty shifts, and only a few containers haphazardly stacked on the grounds, it's a scene no one expected. More than 80 scheduled sailings to the West Coast were cancelled in April alone, and more turbulence is predicted for May. At China's export terminals, containers are piling up like abandoned shopping carts. Some ships skip US stops altogether, while others float idle, waiting for unclear instructions. Port authorities are predicting a drop in cargo volume of up to 35%, perhaps representing a sharper reduction than restrictions during the pandemic. It is as if there is a freeze, not a traffic halt. With export volumes also down, major shipping companies such as Maersk and others are cancelling routes or nearly emptying their sailings. For a long time there has been talk of a supply chain crunch. This time it is not a crunch, but a recession. Some observers say that this is a chain reaction triggered by political moves, just as it appears from the outside. The sudden imposition of abnormal tariffs on imports from China has once again crippled logistics, which were already recovering from the impact of the pandemic. In China, the production line is full of running or cancelled orders, and factories are at risk of shutting down. On the US side, there are dock workers waiting for work at the docks, customs officers working at half capacity, and truck drivers idling. Perhaps the hope is that what's done is done and will be fixed in a few months. But some are predicting a major crisis in the supply chain by the end of 2025. This is considered a blow that could take the industry a long time to recover from. The trade freeze has also hit retail chains hard. Department stores or online retail giants, which for years have been overly dependent on China, are struggling to replace goods when they run out of stock. The National Retail Federation predicts that imports will fall by close to 20% in the second half of this year. This will reduce the number of products on the shelves, limit the variety available to consumers, and at least in certain sectors we may start to see more expensive or hard-to-find alternatives. Large retailers may be able to use their financial resources and survive, but it is not easy for small businesses to cope with such high tariffs and reduced shipments. If the cost of customs duty rises to 145%, even on products with relatively small profit margins, such as simple toys or electronic accessories, they will have to pass this on to the consumer or stop importing altogether. Since retail, logistics, and manufacturing are interconnected, a disruption in one of them will also shake the other. Companies are looking at, let's buy goods from other countries, but it is not that easy to make instant changes. There are those who want to shift to countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia, and those who want to bring production back to the US. However, the infrastructure in Vietnam is not yet on the scale of China. Factories cannot handle the rapid demand, and costs are higher than expected. Moving production to the US requires a long investment, labor is more expensive, and regulations are onerous. And no one knows if the political climate will change in 3 to 5 years or if tariffs will be lowered. Uncertainty is a factor worse than costs. Companies are looking for a strategy by saying one eye on Washington, the other on Beijing, but it is difficult to find a definite result. On the other hand, whether the US economy is resilient or not is also a matter of debate. According to the data released in April, the gross domestic product seems to have contracted by 0.3%. And the fact that it has turned negative for the first time since the pandemic has raised the question: are the danger bells ringing? Because if logistics slows down, production lines in the automotive, technology, and similar sectors will also suffer. A shortage in spare parts imports means the risk of assembly lines coming to a halt. This, in turn, triggers a chain of events reflected in employment and ultimately inflation. In logistics, the decline in the volume of truck shipments and rail transportation has already reduced the working hours of thousands of people. If this goes on for a long time, it could turn into mass layoffs and spread to retail. So, even a simple tariff move has a multiplier effect, freezing different parts of the economy. The US political response to the sudden jump in tariffs to 145% is also interesting. While some say, we had to do this against China, we will save US manufacturing. More moderate voices say, our main enemy will be our own supply crisis. We are the real losers. According to one explanation, logistical bottlenecks at the Port of Los Angeles are likely to cause a 0.25 percentage point loss in national income. And how useful is the additional resource collected from taxpayers or consumers to the country? Tariff revenues may have increased, but billions of dollars of cargo rotting away or sitting in warehouses benefits no one. If companies are unable to function in a trade war environment, it's hard to imagine a boost to US manufacturing. Recent reports by the US Congressional Research Service and a number of independent consulting firms have compiled data on the value of goods ordered or produced from China in 2024-2025 that were not completed or shipped due to various obstacles. According to the report, the total monetary value of goods cancelled, stuck in customs, or diverted by the manufacturer to other markets due to all the trade war and tariff tensions is around $14 billion. This is not an immediate or precise number, but experts agree that these losses are at least that large. US-China trade had reached record highs before 2017. In 2017, for example, US imports from China totaled around $505 billion. When the Trump administration started to escalate tariffs in 2018, the fact that China is still one of the largest suppliers to the US did not change, albeit with a certain decline. However, in the post-2020 period, complicated by both the pandemic and the tariffs, the flow of goods from China to the US has frequently stalled. The extension of customs procedures, the increase in the cost of imports with additional taxes, and the hesitation on the Chinese side, should we produce in such a risky market, led to mountains of accumulated containers. Why did China stop production? Actually, they didn't stop all production altogether, but production lines for the US market slowed down or shut down completely. Many Chinese factories said, the tariffs have reduced our profit margins to zero. In addition, US buyers are cancelling orders and new deals are not coming. Combined with the rise in raw material prices after the pandemic, the produce in China sell to the US formula is not very attractive. The Chinese government also emphasizes the strategy of revitalizing domestic consumption and turning to Asian markets. Therefore, goods that are scheduled to go to the US, contracted or unfinished, are piling up in warehouses. They are included in this lost cargo. So, which ports are experiencing this problem the most? Reports indicate that some parts of the ports, particularly Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Ningbo Zhoushan, Guangzhou, Ningbo Zhoushan, and even Shanghai, are experiencing higher than normal container backlogs. The term ghost port may be an exaggeration, but the sight of unused cranes and idle forklifts in giant yards is a bleak one. Some logistics companies say some terminals are barely occupied by 1 or 2 ships a month due to manufacturers withdrawing from the US market. Considering that these ports normally have a capacity of dozens of ships a week, it is clear how much movement has decreased. We said $14 billion worth of goods is not a clear figure, but the fact that this value is considered lost has repercussions for the US economy. Especially medium-sized companies said, the products we were going to bring from China got stuck in customs, the tax increased, freight costs jumped, and the manufacturer cancelled the deal. Now we have lost our deposit and the shelves are empty. Between lost deposits, additional storage costs, wasted logistics costs, the size of the loss is growing. This is driving up prices in the US domestic market because alternative suppliers are more expensive. And some small businesses are facing the threat of bankruptcy. The picture is not rosy on the Chinese side either. Yes, there is a view that the US will struggle unless we produce. But what will the factories that suddenly cut such huge production capacity do to millions of workers? Unemployment figures are already high in China. According to official figures, the unemployment rate is around 5%, but independent organizations say the real figure is perhaps 10 to 12%, with youth unemployment in particular exceeding 20%. Declining exports due to tariff pressures are also straining the domestic economy, which has not yet fully recovered from the pandemic. Therefore, it is unclear to what extent moves such as new agreements with Russia or turning to the Asian market can compensate for this loss. Let's look at the cargo and port dimension. According to US Department of Commerce data, close to $500 billion worth of goods normally enter from China every year. You can think of this as an average flow of $1.4–1.5 billion a day. Now, there is a blockage in a certain part of this flow. Even if the reports say that about $14 billion of goods are lost or cancelled in the 2024-2025 period, this is 2 to 3%. It may seem small in proportion, but the financial value and the domino effect it will create is huge. It is a crisis that is hitting most small and medium-sized companies, causing job losses and price increases. But how many people are affected? According to reports from the logistics industry, the average container of 40 feet each carries between $50,000 and $70,000 worth of goods. When $14 billion is divided by this figure, it amounts to around 200,000 containers. Of course, this is a very rough calculation, as some containers can carry $100,000 worth of technology products, others $20,000 worth of textiles. Still, it roughly means the uncertain fate of hundreds of thousands of containers. Behind each container, there are dozens of companies, suppliers, transportation companies, customs employees, warehouse workers, etc. Therefore, it can be said that tens of thousands of workers are directly affected. Some of these cargoes never made it to US ports and are being held in China or offshore, sources say. Others arrived at US ports but could not be withdrawn due to customs duty or lack of documentation, increasing warehouse costs. The owner said, "This product is unnecessary for me at this price," and left it. When the customs period expires, the government may confiscate it or re-auction it. Others were never loaded on the ship, and the producer changed the route saying, "Let's sell it to Africa or South America rather than send it to the US market." All this reinforces the idea that the trade war has turned into a stalemate in which no one is winning. Some economists argue that the US is deliberately escalating this process to break away from China, and that alternative production bases such as Vietnam or Mexico will reduce dependence in the long run. This may be true, but it means big trouble in the short term. Those alternative countries do not yet have as extensive capacity as China, and that means hard to source goods. In the end, the scene at America's ports, the shortages on the shelves, and the goods crisis framed by the $14 billion figure show that the trade war is not just a slogan. On the one hand, there are the giant supply networks brought about by globalization, and on the other, the political moves that are tearing these networks apart. In between, real people's jobs, companies' stocks, and raw material supplies are disrupted. If this continues for months, US economic growth will slow further, inflationary pressures will increase, and unemployment could rise, many experts say. China is also a loser, of course. But Beijing is calculating that it can make up the shortfall, perhaps by turning to intra-Asian trade or to Africa and Latin America. The US market is big, but not the only option. America, on the other hand, will not be unable to find goods, but it may face more expensive and limited supplies. So where will this picture evolve? This is an arm wrestle that could last a long time, some say. There are loud voices in US domestic politics that say, "We are not gaining with tariffs, we are losing." But there are also elements who can say, "We have cut dependence on China." If the country is willing to pay an economic price, they may believe that this strategic direction will make the US more competitive in the long run. How realistic is debatable, but the fact remains that ghost ports and empty shelves reflect how serious this has become. The fact that billions of dollars worth of goods have been declared non-existent calls into question how unprepared or blind Trump is on tariffs. Trade experts warn that actions taken without foresighted planning can do little more than disrupt the supply chain. What do you think? Is the $14 billion in cargo withdrawn from China really the missing link in the US economy? Is this a harbinger of a permanent crisis for the US, or just a temporary squeeze? Will China succumb to the pressure of these tariffs and resume exports to the US at full capacity? Or will it find new markets in Asia and move away? We look forward to your comments. If you subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and hit the like button, you can help us grow this debate. See you on the next broadcast. Goodbye.